The conference room's air conditioning hit like a blade against my neck as I walked in that needle-sharp cold that always made the fluorescent lights seem brighter, harsher. 23 degrees exactly. I'd checked the thermostat twice that morning, the way I always did because in a building this size temperature was the one thing you could still control. The smell of dry erase markers hung in the recycled air, mixing with the faint ozone from the photocopier down the hall. I should have known something was wrong when Patricia Henley, our new COO, smiled at me. Marcus, perfect timing. She gestured to the chair directly across from her, the one that faced the wall-mounted monitor where my performance metrics glowed in unforgiving red and green. Please sit. I'd been counting my breath since I got the meeting invite that morning, 4 counts in hold for 4 counts out. It was a habit I'd picked up during my first audit season when the spreadsheets ran so deep I'd forget to breathe normally. Breath 17, hold, release. The thing about following rules is that you start to believe they'll protect you. I'd been at Meridian Solutions for 8 years, climbing from junior analyst to senior operations specialist, and I'd never missed a deadline, never failed an audit, never so much as submitted an expense report 10 minutes late. The employee handbook was bookmarked in 17 places on my desk copy. I knew every policy, every procedure, every clause that governed how we were supposed to treat each other. I thought that mattered. Marcus, you know I've been reviewing operational efficiency since I came on board 3 months ago. Patricia's voice carried that particular corporate cadence, warm enough to seem friendly, precise enough to cut. She wore a charcoal blazer that probably cost more than I made in a week, and her smile never quite reached her eyes. You've been with us for quite some time. 8 years, I said. Started in accounts receivable, moved up through. Yes, I have your file. She slid a manila folder across the glass table. The overhead lights caught the surface, throwing little rainbow prisms against the white walls. I want to talk about redundancy. The word hung in the recycled air like smoke. I opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper with my name at the top and a list of my responsibilities. Next to each responsibility was a check mark and a note in Patricia's handwriting. Can be automated, eVendor handles. Redundant with legal team. I don't understand, but I was starting to. The board has asked me to streamline operations. We're looking at a 15% reduction in overhead costs. She leaned back in her chair and the leather creaked softly. Your position, while historically valuable, overlaps significantly with several other departments. I stared at the paper. 8 years of work reduced to a checklist of redundancies. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd helped design half the efficiency protocols she was now using to eliminate my job. What about the compliance audits? The vendor contract reviews, the all covered. Her smile brightened, and somehow that made it worse. Legal can handle contracts. Finance handles vendor relations. And honestly, most of your audit work can be automated with the new software. The air conditioning cycled on again, and I felt that familiar bite against my skin. Breath 31, hold, release. Patricia, I've been working on the Morrison account integration for 6 months. The deadline is, 2 weeks, yes. Don't worry. We're confident the team can handle the transition. She said it like I was already gone. I thought about Rebecca Martinez in accounting, who'd been coming in early every morning for the past month to manage her mother's chemotherapy appointments around her work schedule. Rebecca, whose medical coverage depended on her full-time status. Rebecca, who'd probably be next on Patricia's efficiency list. Is this effective immediately? We'll need 2 weeks for transition. Standard protocol. She pulled out another folder thicker this time. Here's your separation package. I think you'll find it generous. I flipped through the pages. Severance healthcare continuation, non-compete clause, confidentiality agreement, all standard, all legal, all designed to move people quietly out the door. The thing about being an operations analyst is that you learn to read between the lines of corporate policy. Every rule has an exception. Every procedure has a loophole. Every contract has a clause that can work for you or against you, depending on how carefully you read it. I'd been reading very carefully for 8 years. I'd like to review this with someone before I sign, I said. Patricia's smile flickered, just for a second, but I caught it. Of course, you have until the end of business today. I stood up, feeling the folder's weight in my hands. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see the rest of the office going about their morning routines. Jenkins from IT walking past with his third coffee of the day. Sarah from marketing on the phone gesturing wildly at something on her screen. Rebecca at her desk, squinting at a spreadsheet with the intensity of someone who couldn't afford to make mistakes. Normal Tuesday morning. Normal office sounds. Normal fluorescent hum. Except nothing felt normal anymore. Marcus Patricia was still smiling. I hope you understand this isn't personal. Business is business. I nodded because what else do you do when someone destroys your life and calls it efficiency? The walk back to my desk felt longer than usual, past the motivational posters and the coffee machine that had been broken for 3 weeks. My cubicle sat in the corner by the facility's office, close enough to the building's guts that I could hear the hum of electrical panels and the whistle of air through the ventilation system. I'd always liked the background noise. It reminded me that buildings were living things with their own rhythms and maintenance needs. I sat down and opened my laptop. Email first 17 new messages, including 3 flagged as urgent. Then I opened the severance package again and started reading. Really reading. The first thing you learn in operations is that every document tells a story, and the story isn't always the one written on the surface. The severance package was 12 pages long, dense with legal language and corporate boilerplate, but I'd learned to parse this kind of text the same way I parsed maintenance contracts or vendor agreements. Look for the dates. Look for the conditions. Look for the exceptions. Page 3, subsection 2.4. Employee acknowledges that termination is due to operational restructuring and not performance-related issues. Page 7, subsection 4.1. Severance payment contingent upon signed confidentiality agreement and non-compete clause. Page 9, subsection 5.3. Healthcare continuation available for maximum of 18 months, subject to COBRA regulations and continued premium payments. Standard language. Everything looked clean. Too clean? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Rebecca's extension. But before I could dial, I heard footsteps behind me. Heard you got called into the conference room. I turned around. Danny Reeves from facilities stood behind my cubicle, holding a clipboard and wearing his usual expression of mild concern. Danny was the kind of guy who knew every pipe wire and air duct in the building. He'd been here longer than anyone, including Mr. Morrison himself, and he had the unofficial but absolute authority that comes with being the only person who knows where all the circuit breakers are. Yeah, got my walking papers. Danny's eyebrows went up. Damn. But you're the guy who caught that vendor billing error last year. Saved the company like 50 grand. Apparently that kind of work can be automated now. Bullshit. Danny pulled up the empty chair from the next cubicle and sat down. You mind if I ask you something? I gestured for him to go ahead. You know anything about badge access logs? The question was so unexpected that I almost laughed. Some? Why? Patricia's been asking a lot of questions about who's been in the building after hours. Wants detailed reports on keycard usage timing, that kind of thing. She says it's for security, but he shrugged. I've been doing security for 15 years. This feels different. I leaned forward. Different how? Like she's looking for specific information about specific people. She asked me to pull logs for the past 6 months, but only for certain departments. Accounting, operations, facilities. Not sales, not marketing, not executive level. The air conditioning cycled off and the sudden quiet made our conversation feel more intimate, more conspiratorial. Did you give her what she asked for? Danny grinned. I gave her what she asked for. Badge access logs for the departments she specified. But here's the thing about those logs, they only show you when someone badged in or out. They don't show you what someone was doing while they were here. He leaned closer and lowered his voice. What they also don't show you is when someone uses a master key to access areas without badging. Like hypothetically, if someone wanted to look through personnel files after hours, or check what was on someone's computer, or maybe review confidential information they weren't supposed to have access to. I stared at him. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that the security system tracks a lot more than just badge access. Motion sensors in key areas, after hours computer logins, that kind of thing. Information that doesn't get included in standard reports unless someone specifically asked for it. And no one specifically asked for it. Not yet. The pieces started clicking together in my head. Patricia had been here 3 months. 3 months of efficiency reviews and operational assessments. 3 months of asking the right questions to the right people to build cases for eliminations. Danny, how long do you keep the detailed security logs? Full logs, 18 months. But the motion sensor data computer access logs, that stuff goes back 2 years. It's all archived on the security server. I picked up my pen and started clicking at another nervous habit I'd developed during audit season. Click, click, click. The sound echoed off the cubicle walls. Would you be willing to pull some additional information, hypothetically speaking? Danny's grin got wider. Hypothetically speaking, I'd be happy to help a colleague understand how our security systems work. For educational purposes, of course. Of course. He stood up and adjusted his clipboard. I'll be in the facilities office for the next hour or so, running some routine system checks. If anyone wants to stop by and learn about building security, my door's always open. After he walked away, I sat in the sudden quiet of my cubicle and thought about what I just learned. Patricia wasn't just eliminating positions randomly. She was targeting specific people, people who might have access to information she didn't want them to have. People like me who knew how to read contracts and spot irregularities. People like Rebecca who processed invoices and tracked payments. I opened my laptop and pulled up the employee directory. 43 people in operations, accounting, and facilities combined. If Patricia was really planning a 15% reduction in overhead, that meant 6 or 7 people. 6 or 7 people who all happened to work in departments that had oversight responsibilities. That wasn't efficiency, that was strategic elimination. My phone buzzed, text message from Rebecca. Coffee, need to talk. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the elevator. The break room was on the 3rd floor, a communal space with mismatched chairs and a coffee machine that actually worked. Rebecca was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, with a mug that said, World's Okayest Accountant, a gift from her daughter. She looked exhausted. Heard about your meeting, she said as I sat down across from her. News travels fast. Patricia called me right after you left. I'm having my efficiency review tomorrow morning. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Rebecca, it's fine. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug and I could see the slight tremor in her fingers. I mean, it's not fine, but I expected it. The writing's been on the wall since she got here. Through the window, I could see the parking lot 3 floors below. Patricia's silver BMW was parked in the spot closest to the building, the one that used to belong to the previous COO. Everything about her suggested someone who was used to getting what she wanted when she wanted it. How's your mom doing? I asked. Rebecca's face tightened. Chemo's working, but insurance is being weird about the new medication. Pre-authorization issues, they say. Might not be covered. How much are we talking about? $1,500 a month, without insurance. She took a sip of coffee and grimaced. I've been picking up extra hours to cover the co-pays, but if I lose this job, she didn't need to finish the sentence. I thought about the severance package sitting on my desk, about the confidentiality agreement and the non-compete clause, about the story Patricia was trying to tell about operational efficiency and the story that might actually be true. Rebecca, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. She nodded. In the past 3 months since Patricia started, have you noticed anything unusual about your work? Any requests for information that seemed outside normal procedures? Any changes to processes that didn't quite make sense? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the parking lot. She asked me to review all the vendor payments from the past year, she said finally. Said she wanted to identify opportunities for cost savings, but she was very specific about which vendors she wanted me to look at. Which ones? Facilities, maintenance, legal services, consulting firms, the big-ticket recurring expenses. Rebecca looked at me. Marcus, some of those payments were unusual. Unusual how? Timing mostly. Like we'd pay a consulting firm the same day we signed a contract with them. Or we'd pay legal fees before the work was actually completed. And some of the invoice descriptions were really vague. The air conditioning kicked on again, and I felt that familiar chill. But this time it felt less like discomfort and more like clarity. Did you mention any of this to Patricia? I asked her about a few discrepancies during our last weekly meeting. She said she'd look into it, but then the next day she moved up my efficiency review. Rebecca set down her coffee mug and looked at me directly. Marcus, what if we're not being eliminated because we're redundant? What if we're being eliminated because we know too much? The question hung in the air between us like the scent of overbrewed coffee. I thought about Danny's security logs, about badge access and motion sensors and after-hours computer usage, about the kind of information that doesn't show up in standard reports unless someone knows to ask for it, about the kind of information that might explain why Patricia was so interested in eliminating people who understood how to read between the lines. Rebecca, are you working late tonight? I was planning to. Why? Don't. Go home at 5 sharp, but tomorrow morning come in early, like 7:30 early. Marcus, what are you thinking? I stood up and pushed my chair back under the table. The legs scraped against the linoleum floor, a sound that somehow felt like a decision being made. I'm thinking that if we're going down, we might as well go down swinging. The rest of the day passed in a blur of normal office routine punctuated by moments of intense planning. I finished the Morrison account analysis, 8 months of work, distilled into a 40-page report that Patricia would probably delete without reading. I organized my files, backed up my computer, and sent polite transition emails to all my regular contacts. All normal things, all expected things. I also did some other things. At 3:30, I stopped by Danny's office in the facilities department. The room smelled like machine oil and coffee, and the walls were covered with building schematics and maintenance schedules. Danny was sitting at his desk, scrolling through something on his computer screen. "How are those routine system checks going?" I asked. "Educational," he said without looking up. "Very educational. You know, I had no idea how much information these security systems actually collect." He turned his monitor so I could see the screen. It showed a spreadsheet with timestamps, badge numbers, and location codes. "This is just badge access for the past week," he said. "But watch this." He clicked to another tab, and the screen filled with a different kind of data. Motion sensor activations, computer logins, file access logs. Every time someone moves through the building after hours, the system tracks it. Every time someone logs into a computer outside normal business hours, we have a record. Every time someone accesses confidential files, prints documents, sends emails, it's all here. I leaned closer to the screen. The data was overwhelming, but Danny had organized it chronologically and by location. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a cluster of entries from 2 weeks ago. Someone was in the accounting department from 10:15 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. on a Tuesday night. Accessed multiple computers, printed 47 pages of documents, and spent an hour and 20 minutes in the file room. Who? Danny clicked to another tab, and I saw badge number 40472. He cross-referenced it with the employee directory. Patricia Henley. What was she doing in accounting for over 2 hours after midnight? "That's the million-dollar question," Danny said. "But whatever it was, she didn't want anyone to know about it. Look at this." He showed me the badge access log for the same night. According to the official record, Patricia had left the building at 6:15 p.m. She used a master key to get back in. Probably through the loading dock entrance. It doesn't require badge access from the inside, and the parking lot camera has a blind spot right there. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. "Danny, how often has this happened?" "At least once a week for the past 2 months. Always after hours, always using master key access, always in departments she's now targeting for efficiency improvements." The picture was starting to come together, and I didn't like what I was seeing. Can you print this out?" "Already did." Danny opened his desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder. Motion sensor logs, computer access records file, room entry times. Everything going back 3 months. I took the folder and felt the weight of it in my hands. Paper evidence. Digital breadcrumbs. The kind of documentation that tells a story whether you want it to or not. "Danny, why are you helping me with this?" He leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a moment. "You know I've got a daughter, right, Jenny? She's 12 and she's autistic. High functioning, but she needs a lot of support. Special schools therapy medication." He paused. "Our insurance covers most of it, but only if I maintain full-time status with benefits." "You think you're on Patricia's list?" "I know I'm on Patricia's list. She asked me last week about automating building maintenance, outsourcing facilities management to a third-party company. Told me to put together a cost-benefit analysis for eliminating the facilities department entirely." Danny opened another drawer and pulled out a thick binder. 15 years of maintenance logs, vendor contracts, and service records. "You know what I found when I really started digging?" I shook my head. "We've been overpaying for services, not by a little, by a lot. Legal fees that don't match the work performed. Consulting contracts that seem to pay for work that was never delivered. Maintenance expenses for equipment we don't actually have." He handed me the binder. It was heavy with color-coded tabs and post-it notes marking specific pages. "Danny, this is wowie. Fraud," he said simply. "Or at minimum gross financial mismanagement. And whoever's responsible for it has been very careful to make sure the people who might notice are either gone or too scared to speak up." I looked down at the folder in my hands, then at the binder Danny had given me. 18 months of security logs, 15 years of maintenance records, months of unusual vendor payments, and after-hours file access. Evidence. What do we do with this? Danny's grin was sharp and determined. We figure out exactly what Patricia's been up to, and then we make sure the right people know about it. That night, I stayed at the office until almost 10 p.m. Not unusual, I'd been working late for weeks to finish the Morrison account integration, but tonight felt different. Tonight, I wasn't just working, I was hunting. The building after hours has a different personality. The overhead fluorescents are replaced by security lighting that casts everything in amber shadows. The air conditioning runs on a lighter cycle so the temperature fluctuates more. And the sounds are different. No keyboards clicking, no phones ringing, no background murmur of conversation. Just the electrical hum of computers and the distant whistle of air through ductwork. I spread Danny's security logs across my desk and started building a timeline. Patricia's after-hours activities mapped against her daytime meetings and policy changes. The pattern that emerged was methodical, deliberate, and deeply concerning. 3 months ago, Patricia's first week on the job. No unusual after-hours activity. 2.5 months ago, first late-night access to the accounting department. The next day, Patricia announced new expense reporting procedures that required additional documentation for all vendor payments. 2 months ago, extended late-night access to legal files and HR records. The following week, Patricia implemented new performance evaluation criteria that emphasized efficiency metrics over traditional performance measures. 6 weeks ago, multiple after-hours sessions in the operations department. Days later, Patricia began her individual efficiency reviews with senior staff. Each break-in was followed by policy changes that gave Patricia more control over information and personnel decisions. She wasn't just preparing to eliminate redundant positions. She was systematically removing anyone who might have access to information she didn't want them to have. But information about what? I opened Danny's maintenance binder and started cross-referencing vendor payments with actual services performed. What I found made my stomach drop. Nexus Legal Services, $45,000 paid in March for contract review and regulatory compliance. But according to Danny's logs, no one from Nexus had visited our offices in March. In fact, the only legal work performed that month was handled by our existing in-house counsel. Meridian Consulting Group's $78,000 paid in February for operational efficiency analysis. But I knew for a fact that no external consultants had been involved in operations during February. I would have been part of any such analysis. Advanced Facilities Management, $52,000 paid in January for building automation upgrades. But Danny's maintenance logs showed no automation work performed in January and no visits from Advanced Facilities personnel. 3 payments, 3 vendors, $175,000 total, all paid to companies that didn't appear to have performed any actual work. I pulled out my laptop and started researching the vendor companies. Nexus Legal Services had a professional-looking website, but no listed staff or office address. Meridian Consulting Group's website was even more sparse, just a logo and a contact form. Advanced Facilities Management had no web presence at all. Shell companies, or at minimum companies that existed only on paper. My phone buzzed. Text message from Rebecca. Working late too. Found something interesting. Can you come to accounting? I gathered up the papers and walked through the amber-lit hallways to the accounting department. Rebecca was at her desk, surrounded by printouts and file folders. She looked up when I approached, and her expression was grim. Marcus, we have a problem, a big one. She gestured to the papers spread across her desk. I've been tracking the vendor payments Patricia asked me to review, but I didn't just look at the payments, I looked at the approval process. She handed me a stack of payment authorizations, each one stamped with approval signatures and dates. Every one of these unusual payments was approved by the same person. I looked at the signatures. Patricia Henley, COO, all of them. But here's the thing, Rebecca continued. Patricia wasn't our COO when most of these payments were made. She only started 3 months ago, but some of these payments go back 8 months. I stared at the documents. The signatures were definitely Patricia's. I'd seen her handwriting enough times to recognize it, but the dates were wrong. Rebecca, these signatures are backdated. That's what I thought too. So I pulled the original payment authorizations from the archives. She handed me another stack of papers. These were photocopies, but they showed different signatures entirely. Signatures I didn't recognize. Someone forged approval documents, I said. Someone with access to our filing systems, our payment processes, and enough authority to make changes without anyone questioning them. The air conditioning kicked on, and I felt that familiar chill against my neck. But this time it felt less like discomfort and more like the moment when all the pieces of a puzzle click into place. Rebecca Patricia didn't just happen to target people for elimination. She's been planning this for months, maybe longer. Wait, planning what? I thought about the shell companies, the fraudulent payments, the backdated signatures. About the systematic elimination of people who might have access to information about financial irregularities. A cover-up. She's been embezzling money through fake vendor payments, and now she's eliminating anyone who might have the skills or access to discover what she's been doing. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, staring at the papers spread across her desk. Marcus, if we're right about this, we're not just talking about job eliminations. We're talking about fraud, serious fraud. How much money are we talking about? Rebecca pulled out a calculator and started adding up the questionable payments. Based on what I found so far, at least $300,000 over the past 8 months. But I think there's more, a lot more. $300,000, enough to buy a very nice car or make a down payment on a house or pay for medical treatments that insurance won't cover. Enough to kill for if you were desperate enough. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from an unknown number. Marcus Chen. Marcus, it's Danny. I'm calling from my cell phone. Don't use your work phone for the next few minutes. What's wrong? I've been monitoring the security system remotely. Someone just badged into the building. Badge number 4072. Patricia, at almost 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Where is she? Heading for the elevator. Based on her pattern, she'll probably go to accounting first, then operations. I looked at Rebecca, who had heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. Danny, where are you? Home. But I can see everything remotely. Motion sensors badge access computer logins. If she tries to access anything, I'll know about it. What do we do, Assam? Right now, nothing. Let her do whatever she came to do, but document everything. We need to know what she's looking for. I hung up and turned to Rebecca. We need to leave now. But all this evidence, take it with you, all of it. If Patricia's here, it means she knows we're getting close to something she doesn't want us to find. Rebecca started gathering papers, stuffing them into file folders and manila envelopes. I helped her organize everything into a portable format, the kind of evidence you could carry in a briefcase or a laptop bag. My car's in the parking lot, I said. But if Patricia sees it, loading dock, Rebecca said. There's an emergency exit that leads directly to the employee parking area behind the building. Danny showed it to me during the safety orientation. We made our way through the amber-lit hallways carrying months of evidence in paper bags and file folders. The building felt different at night, bigger, emptier, full of shadows that could hide anything. The emergency exit opened onto a small parking area behind the building, lit by sodium lights that cast everything in orange and black. Rebecca's car was parked near the dumpsters, away from the main employee lot. As we loaded the evidence into her trunk, I heard the faint sound of a door closing somewhere in the building behind us. She's moving, I said. My phone buzzed. Text from Danny, accounting department, accessing Rebecca's computer. I showed Rebecca the message and her face went pale. What's on your computer that she might want? Everything. Vendor files, payment records, the analysis I've been working on. If she deletes it? Miartishwarn. Can you access it remotely? Not the local files, but I back everything up to the cloud server every night. Rebecca pulled out her phone and started typing. I'm copying everything to a secure folder right now. Another text from Danny, printing something, lot of something. Estimate 40 to 50 pages. She's printing evidence, I said. Probably to destroy it. Or to alter it, Rebecca said. If she changes the original files and prints new versions, she can claim the ones we have are forgeries. The implications hit me like cold air. Patricia wasn't just covering her tracks, she was rewriting history. With enough time and access, she could make it look like the fraud never happened, or that someone else was responsible for it. Another text, moving to operations, accessing your computer now. My computer contained 8 years of operational analysis, vendor reviews, and compliance reports. If Patricia could alter or delete that information, she could eliminate any evidence that the questionable payments had been flagged or investigated. We need to get back inside, I said. Marcus, that's crazy. If she finds us, if she destroys the evidence, we have nothing. Just copies of documents she can claim are forgeries. I thought about what we knew and what we could prove. Security logs that showed Patricia's after-hours access. Financial records that showed questionable payments. Maintenance logs that showed services never performed. It was all circumstantial, suggestive but not conclusive. What we needed was Patricia in the act, on camera, with witnesses. Rebecca, how long does it take you to back up your computer files? 20 minutes for a full backup. Why? Because I think we need to catch her red-handed. My phone rang. Danny again. Marcus, she's been in your office for 10 minutes. Accessing files, deleting things, copying information to a flash drive. Can you see what she's deleting? Okay, not specifically, but the security cameras show her working at your computer. And here's the interesting part. She's not being careful about the cameras. She's acting like she has every right to be there. Of course she was. Patricia was the COO. Officially, she had authorization to access any department, any computer, any file in the building. What she didn't have was the right to alter or destroy evidence of criminal activity. But proving criminal intent required catching her in the act of deliberately concealing evidence, not just accessing files she was technically authorized to access. Danny, I need you to do something. Can you activate the emergency lighting system? The full building emergency lighting that would trigger the alarm system. What if there was a legitimate building emergency, something that required immediate investigation? Danny was quiet for a moment. What kind of emergency are you thinking about? No one. The kind that requires both the COO and the senior operations analyst to be in the building immediately to address it. Marcus, I'm not sure. Danny, in 15 minutes, there's going to be a water pressure issue in the main building line. The kind of issue that could affect the sprinkler system and requires immediate attention from facilities management and operations. A water pressure issue that doesn't actually exist. A water pressure issue that gives us a legitimate reason to be in the building with the COO present as a witness. Rebecca was looking at me like I'd lost my mind. What are you thinking? She asked. I'm thinking that if Patricia is in the building at 11:30 p.m. altering evidence, and we happen to be called in for a building emergency at the same time, we might just happen to discover what she's really been up to. My phone buzzed with another text from Danny. She's leaving your office, heading back to accounting. Danny, I said into the phone, how quickly can you get back to the building? 15 minutes if I speed. Do it, and Danny, bring your master key and your camera. I hung up and turned to Rebecca. Are you with me on this, Uri? She looked at the trunk of her car filled with evidence we'd spent months collecting. Then she looked back at the building where Patricia was systematically destroying any proof of her crimes. I'm with you. We waited in Rebecca's car in the employee parking lot, watching the building's windows for signs of movement. At 11:45, Danny's pickup truck pulled into the facility's entrance. At 11:50, my phone rang. Marcus, this is Danny from facilities. We've got a building emergency. Water pressure issue in the main line. I need you here immediately to help assess potential operational impacts. I'll be right there. I hung up and called Rebecca. Rebecca, I just got a call about a building emergency. Can you meet me at the office? I need your help accessing some financial records related to our building maintenance contracts. Oh, I'll be right there. We walked back into the building through the main entrance, badging in normally and legitimately. The security system would show that we arrived at 11:55 p.m. in response to a building emergency. What it would also show was that we arrived while Patricia was still in the building, still accessing files she had no legitimate reason to be accessing at midnight on a Tuesday. Danny met us in the lobby wearing his work coveralls and carrying a clipboard and a digital camera. Water pressure's fine now, he said loudly enough for the security microphones to pick up. But I want to double-check the computer records to make sure there wasn't any damage to the building automation systems. We took the elevator to the second floor where the operations and accounting departments were located. As the doors opened, we could see light coming from the accounting area. Looks like someone else is working late, Danny said. We walked toward the light, our footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. As we got closer, we could see Patricia at Rebecca's desk, a laptop bag open beside her, and papers scattered across the workspace. She looked up as we approached, and for just a moment, her carefully maintained composure slipped. Patricia, I said, what are you doing here so late? I could ask you the same question. Her voice was steady, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. Building emergency, Danny said, holding up his clipboard. Water pressure issue. Marcus and Rebecca are helping me check for any potential damage to computer systems and financial records. At midnight, infrastructure doesn't keep business hours, I said. What about you working pretty late for an efficiency review? Patricia gestured to the papers on Rebecca's desk. Just reviewing some operational data, making sure we have all the information we need for tomorrow's personnel decisions. I looked at the papers. They were printouts of financial records, vendor contracts, and payment authorizations. Some of them looked familiar, They were the same documents Rebecca and I had been analyzing earlier. Find anything interesting? Rebecca asked. Patricia's smile was sharp and cold. Just confirming some discrepancies in operational spending. Nothing that can't be addressed through proper personnel management. She started gathering up the papers, but Danny stepped forward. Actually, since we're all here, maybe you could help us with something. We've been having some questions about vendor payments for building maintenance. Some discrepancies between what we've been paying and what services were actually performed. Patricia's hand stilled on the papers. What kind of discrepancies? H. Sarnes. Danny opened his clipboard and pulled out a maintenance log. Well, for instance, we paid Advanced Facilities Management $52,000 in January for building automation upgrades. But according to our records, no automation work was performed in January, and no one from Advanced Facilities ever visited the building. That's an operational matter, Patricia said. I'll look into it. The thing is, Rebecca said, we've been looking into it, and we found some interesting patterns in the payment authorizations. She pulled out her phone and opened the cloud backup files she'd been creating. For instance, this payment authorization for Nexus Legal Services. It's signed and dated by you, but it's dated 2 months before you started working here. Patricia's face went very still. There must be some mistake. Or this one, I said, pulling out one of the payment documents from my jacket pocket. Meridian Consulting Group, $78,000 for operational efficiency analysis. Signed by you, dated 6 months ago. But you weren't our COO 6 months ago. And no operational efficiency analysis was performed by any external consultants during that time period. The air conditioning cycled on, filling the silence with that familiar electrical hum. Patricia looked at the three of us standing there with our documents and our evidence and our very legitimate reason for being in the building at midnight. I think there's been some confusion, she said carefully. I think there has been, Danny said. The kind of confusion that comes from backdated signatures on fraudulent payment authorizations. He held up his camera. The kind of confusion that gets cleared up when you compare original documents with forged ones, especially when the forgery is documented by building security cameras. Patricia's composure finally cracked. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Actually, we do, I said. $300,000 in fraudulent vendor payments, backdated authorization signatures, systematic elimination of personnel who might have access to financial oversight. We know exactly what we're dealing with. It's not that simple. It's fraud, Rebecca said, and it's going to stop. Patricia looked around the accounting department at the papers scattered across Rebecca's desk, at the evidence we'd collected at the camera Danny was holding. Then she did something I didn't expect. She sat down. You want to know what happened? She said. Fine, I'll tell you what happened. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that familiar, harsh white glow. Outside the Sodium parking lot, lights painted amber rectangles on the dark windows. Meridian Solutions was failing when I got here, Patricia said. Revenue down 15% year over year. Operating expenses up 20%. Client retention at an all-time low. The board brought me in to turn things around or shut it down. She looked at each of us in turn. The vendor payments weren't fraud. They were survival. Emergency consulting to identify cost-saving opportunities. Legal services to restructure vendor contracts. Facilities management to implement efficiency protocols. With shell companies, Danny said. Companies that don't exist. Companies that exist, Patricia corrected. Just not in the way you think. She opened her laptop bag and pulled out a folder. Nexus Legal Services is a subsidiary of Hamilton Kress and Associates. Meridian Consulting Group is a division of Strategic Operations International. Advanced Facilities Management is a specialized unit of Morrison Building Services. She handed Danny a stack of business cards and corporate documentation. All legitimate companies, all performing legitimate services, just operating under subsidiary names for confidentiality purposes. I looked at the documents. They looked official, professional, letterhead, corporate seals, detailed service contracts. Why the secrecy? Rebecca asked. Because if word got out that Meridian Solutions was hiring emergency consultants to prevent bankruptcy, our stock price would have crashed and our clients would have fled. We needed to stabilize the company quietly without triggering a panic. Patricia pulled out another set of documents. These are the actual service reports. Operational efficiency analysis, legal contract reviews, facilities optimization studies. All performed exactly as contracted. The reports were comprehensive, hundreds of pages of analysis recommendations and implementation plans. The kind of work that would easily justify the payments we'd been questioning. But the backdated signatures I started were corrections, Patricia said. When I came on board, I discovered that the previous COO had been authorizing payments without proper documentation. I had to recreate the approval paperwork to ensure compliance with accounting standards. She looked directly at me. Marcus, you of all people should understand the importance of proper documentation. Would you rather I left fraudulent or missing paperwork in place or corrected it to reflect what actually happened? I stared at the documents in my hands. Everything looked legitimate, professional, properly executed, but something still felt wrong. Patricia, I said slowly, if all of this is legitimate, why are you in the building at midnight going through confidential files? Because, she said, I discovered that someone has been systematically copying confidential financial information and building a case file suggesting fraud where none exists. She gestured to the papers scattered across Rebecca's desk. Someone who has been accessing financial records outside their normal job responsibilities. Someone who has been collaborating with facilities management to access security logs without authorization. Someone who has been creating a false narrative about vendor payments in order to discredit my efficiency improvements. The room went very quiet. Are you saying, Rebecca started, I'm saying that Marcus has been building a case for wrongful termination by manufacturing evidence of fraud. And he's been using Rebecca and Danny to help him do it. Patricia stood up and walked to Danny's security camera. The question is, what are we going to do about it? The air conditioning cycled off and the sudden quiet felt heavy and expectant. I looked at Rebecca, who was staring at the documents in Patricia's hands with an expression of growing doubt. I looked at Danny, who was holding his camera, but no longer pointing it at Patricia. And I realized that Patricia had just done something very clever. She'd told a story that explained all the evidence we'd collected, but from a completely different perspective. A story where she was the responsible executive trying to save a failing company, and we were the disgruntled employees trying to discredit her efforts. A story that was just plausible enough to create reasonable doubt. Patricia, I said carefully, if everything you're saying is true, then you won't mind if we verify it. Verify it how? Contact these subsidiary companies directly. Speak with the people who perform the work. Review the original contracts and service reports. Patricia smiled. Of course. I'll have my assistant provide you with all the contact information tomorrow morning. Why not tonight? Because it's almost 1 a.m., and normal business hours don't start until 9. She closed her laptop and started gathering up the papers. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an early meeting with the board tomorrow to discuss the operational efficiency recommendations, including recommendations about employees who abuse their access privileges to build false cases against company leadership. Patricia walked toward the elevator, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. Oh, and Marcus, your termination is still effective at the end of business tomorrow. I suggest you use the time to clean out your desk properly. The elevator doors closed behind her, and we were left standing in the accounting department surrounded by evidence that suddenly felt a lot less certain. Well, Danny said after a long moment, that was interesting. Interesting wasn't the word I would have used. Rebecca sat down at her desk and stared at her computer screen. What if she's telling the truth? She said quietly. What if she's not? I replied. But doubt was creeping in the way it always does when someone tells you a story that explains everything you thought you knew from a completely different angle. I pulled out my phone and called the number on one of the Nexus Legal Services business cards Patricia had given us. Voicemail. You have reached Nexus Legal Services. Our offices are currently closed. Normal business hours are Monday through Friday 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Professional voicemail. Exactly what you'd expect from a legitimate business. I tried Meridian Consulting Group. Same thing, professional voicemail, normal business hours. Advanced Facilities Management didn't even have a phone number listed. We need to verify this, I said. How? Rebecca asked. I thought about it. How do you verify the existence of subsidiary companies that might or might not exist? How do you confirm that services were actually performed when the people who supposedly performed them are unreachable after hours? How do you prove fraud when the person you're accusing has a plausible explanation for everything? We wait until morning, I said finally, and then we start making phone calls. But as I said it, I realized that Patricia had gained something valuable from our midnight confrontation. Time. 12 hours to make sure that when we called those numbers, the right people would answer with the right stories. 12 hours to make sure that any evidence of actual fraud was cleaned up or explained away. 12 hours to make sure that when the board meeting happened, we would look like the disgruntled employees crying fraud and she would look like the competent executive who had caught us in the act. Danny, I said, those security logs you pulled, can Patricia access them? Danny's face went pale. She's the COO. She has administrative access to all building systems. Can she alter them? Not easily, but she could probably delete specific entries or modify timestamps. I felt that familiar chill of air conditioning, but this time it felt less like clarity and more like the moment you realize you've been outmaneuvered. We need to get those logs off-site tonight. Already done, Danny said. I copied everything to a personal drive before I came back to the building. Good, what about the financial records? So Rebecca held up her phone. Cloud backup. She can't access it without my password. And the vendor documentation. I patted my jacket pocket where I'd kept the most important payment authorizations and maintenance logs. Safe. But even as I said it, I knew that having the evidence was only half the battle. The other half was proving that it meant what we thought it meant. And Patricia had just thrown enough doubt into the mix to make that a lot harder. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Marcus, this is Patricia. I wanted to follow up on our conversation tonight. I've spoken with the board about the situation, and they're very concerned about the allegations you've been making. They've asked me to give you an opportunity to clarify your position before they take any formal action. Please come to the conference room at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. Bring Rebecca and Danny with you. A board meeting, 8 a.m., 3 hours before normal business hours. I showed the message to Rebecca and Danny. It's a trap, Rebecca said immediately. Maybe, I said, or maybe it's an opportunity. An opportunity for what? I thought about Patricia's story, about subsidiary companies and emergency consulting and backdated paperwork corrections, about a narrative that explained everything we discovered, but from a perspective that made us look like the criminals, about the fact that she'd had 12 hours to prepare for exactly this moment, an opportunity to find out if she's telling the truth. Danny shook his head. Marcus, if we walk into that conference room tomorrow morning, we better be damn sure we know what we're talking about. We are sure. Are we? The question hung in the air like the scent of overbrewed coffee and night shift anxiety. Looking back, I realized that this was the moment when everything could have gone differently. The moment when I could have accepted Patricia's story, taken my severance package and walked away. The moment when I could have chosen comfort over principle. But I kept thinking about Rebecca's mother and the chemotherapy treatments that insurance might not cover, about Danny's daughter and the special needs services that depended on his full-time employment, about all the other people who would be quietly eliminated in the name of efficiency while Patricia covered her tracks and protected her secrets, about the fact that following the rules perfectly hadn't protected any of us. We're sure, I said, but we had 8 hours to make sure we were right. The rest of the night passed in a blur of phone calls, internet research, and careful documentation. We set up in Rebecca's living room, spreading papers and laptops across her coffee table, while she made pot after pot of coffee, and we systematically verified every piece of information Patricia had given us. Nexus Legal Services had a professional website with a New York address, but when Danny called the building directory, no one had heard of them. Meridian Consulting Group was listed with the Better Business Bureau, but their business registration was only 3 months old, exactly when Patricia had started at our company. Advanced Facilities Management existed, but only as a DBA filing with no associated business address or employee records. The deeper we dug, the more it became clear that Patricia's subsidiary companies were sophisticated shells, real enough to pass casual inspection, but fake enough to allow money to disappear without a trace. By 6 a.m., we had built a timeline that showed how Patricia had been systematically embezzling money through fake vendor payments, while simultaneously eliminating anyone who might discover her scheme. By 7 a.m., we had contact information for the board members and a packet of evidence that we could present clearly and convincingly. By 7:30, we were back at the office, sitting in the parking lot and watching for Patricia's silver BMW. She arrived at 7:45, 15 minutes early for the meeting she had called. Last chance to back out, Danny said. You guys don't have to do this, I said. This is my fight. Rebecca shook her head. It's all of our fight. If she gets away with this, she'll do it again somewhere else. Danny nodded. My daughter's future is worth more than my comfort. We walked into the building together, badged in through the main entrance, and took the elevator to the third-floor conference room. Patricia was already there, sitting at the head of the long glass table. She was wearing a navy blue suit that probably cost more than I made in a month, and her laptop was open in front of her with a presentation ready to go. But she wasn't alone. Three other people sat around the table, board members I recognized from company newsletters and quarterly meetings. Margaret Chen, no relation, the board chair and former CEO of a major consulting firm. David Morrison, the company founder and current board vice chair. And Janet Williams, the lead independent director and a former federal prosecutor. Patricia smiled as we entered. Thank you all for coming. I know this is unusual timing, but given the seriousness of the allegations, the board felt it was important to address this matter immediately. Margaret Chen nodded and gestured for us to sit. We understand there have been some concerns raised about financial irregularities. We'd like to hear from all parties and get to the bottom of this. I sat down across from Patricia and set my folder of evidence on the table. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us. Before we begin, Patricia said, I want to make sure everyone understands the context of this situation. She clicked a button on her laptop, and the wall-mounted monitor came to life with a PowerPoint presentation. 3 months ago, I was brought in as COO to address serious operational and financial challenges facing Meridian Solutions. Revenue was declining, expenses were rising, and the company was facing potential bankruptcy within 18 months. The slide showed charts and graphs that painted a dire picture of company finances. Working with board-approved consultants and legal advisors, we implemented an emergency stabilization plan that included operational efficiency improvements, vendor contract renegotiations, and strategic personnel adjustments. Another slide showing the improvement in key financial metrics over the past 3 months. The plan worked. We've stabilized revenue, reduced operational expenses by 12%, and improved client retention significantly. Margaret Chen leaned forward. That's all very encouraging, Patricia. But what does this have to do with the allegations we're here to discuss? Patricia clicked to the next slide. Yesterday, I discovered that Marcus Chen has been systematically accessing confidential financial information outside his normal job responsibilities, building a false case suggesting fraud in our vendor relationships and recruiting other employees to help him gather information for what appears to be a wrongful termination lawsuit. The slide showed security camera footage of me and Rebecca in the accounting department, timestamps clearly visible. Last night, I came in to secure confidential information that Mr. Chen and his accomplices had been copying without authorization, and I found them in the building after hours attempting to access additional files. Another slide showing Danny's security logs with entries highlighted. The pattern is clear. Mr. Chen was terminated yesterday for legitimate operational reasons, and he's now attempting to discredit the efficiency improvements that justified his elimination. Patricia turned to look directly at me. I have documentation showing that every vendor payment Mr. Chen is questioning was properly authorized, properly documented, and properly executed. What I don't have is any explanation for why he thought it was appropriate to conduct unauthorized investigations of company financial records. The room was quiet for a moment, then Janet Williams spoke. Mr. Chen, what's your response to these allegations? I opened my folder and pulled out the stack of payment authorizations. Patricia is right about one thing. I have been investigating vendor payments. What she's not telling you is why. I slid the first document across the table to Janet Williams. This is a payment authorization for Nexus Legal Services dated 6 months ago and signed by Patricia. But Patricia wasn't our COO 6 months ago. She's been backdating signatures on payment authorizations for work that was never performed. Janet examined the document, then passed it to Margaret Chen. Ms. Henley, can you explain this discrepancy? Patricia smiled confidently. As I mentioned in my presentation when I came on board, I discovered that the previous COO had been authorizing payments without proper documentation. I had to recreate the approval paperwork to ensure compliance with accounting standards. By forging signatures, by providing the documentation that should have existed in the first place. I pulled out another document. Here's the original payment authorization for the same invoice. As you can see, it was signed by the previous COO, not Patricia, but when we checked the files yesterday, the original had been replaced with Patricia's backdated version. David Morrison took the document and compared it with the first one. These are definitely different signatures. Because one is legitimate and one is forged, Rebecca said. Patricia's confidence flickered for just a moment. The previous COO's authorizations were invalid because the payments exceeded his approval authority. I had to correct the documentation to reflect proper approval procedures. Without board knowledge or approval, Margaret Chen asked, it was an administrative correction? For $300,000 in payments, Danny said. Payments to companies that don't actually exist. I pulled out my phone and put it on speaker. I called Nexus Legal Services this morning at 9 a.m. when their offices should have been open. I played the recording, a generic voicemail message followed by the sound of the line disconnecting after 30 seconds. I called Meridian Consulting Group, same thing. Another recording, another disconnect. Advanced Facilities Management doesn't even have a working phone number. Patricia was shaking her head. That's not accurate. These are legitimate subsidiary companies with fake addresses, Rebecca said, with business registrations that are only 3 months old, with no employees, no office space, and no actual business operations. She pulled out her laptop and opened the research we'd done overnight. Nexus Legal Services lists a New York address that's actually a mailboxes, etc. Meridian Consulting Group's business registration was filed the same week Patricia started working here. Advanced Facilities Management exists only as a DBA filing with no associated business records. Margaret Chen was looking through the documents we'd provided, comparing them with Patricia's presentation materials. Ms. Henley, these are serious allegations. Do you have any evidence that these companies actually performed the services they were paid for? Patricia opened her laptop bag and pulled out a stack of reports. Of course. Here are the deliverables from each consulting engagement. She handed the reports to David Morrison, who started flipping through them. But Danny was already shaking his head. Those reports are templates, he said. Generic operational efficiency studies with our company name inserted. I've seen the same template documents used by 3 different consulting firms in the past 5 years. That's not true. Page 47, Danny said. Third paragraph. There's a reference to client companies' manufacturing operations. But Meridian Solutions doesn't have any manufacturing operations. We're a professional services firm. David Morrison flipped to page 47 and read the paragraph aloud. Client companies' manufacturing operations show significant opportunities for automation and workforce optimization. He looked up. Danny's right. This is obviously a template document. Patricia's composure was starting to crack. There may have been some formatting errors in the final reports, but the analysis and recommendations are legitimate. Patricia Janet Williams said in a voice that carried the authority of someone who had prosecuted corporate fraud cases, I think we need to stop here and talk about getting you legal representation. That's not necessary. It is necessary, Margaret Chen said firmly. Based on what we've seen this morning, there's reasonable evidence suggesting fraudulent vendor payments, forged authorization documents, and attempted cover-up activities. She turned to me. Mr. Chen, do you have additional evidence you'd like to present? I pulled out the final document from my folder, Danny's security logs, showing Patricia's after-hours building access patterns. Patricia has been accessing confidential files after hours for the past 2 months, always in departments she's now targeting for personnel elimination. She's been systematically removing anyone who might have the knowledge or access to discover her embezzlement scheme. I slid the security logs across the table. Last night wasn't the first time she's been in the building illegally. It was just the first time she got caught. Janet Williams reviewed the logs, then looked at Patricia. Do you have an explanation for these after-hours building entries? Patricia was quiet for a long moment, looking around the conference room at the board members, at the evidence scattered across the table, at the 3 employees who had refused to quietly disappear. Then she did something I didn't expect. She laughed. You want to know the truth? Fine. Here's the truth. She closed her laptop and pushed it away from her. Meridian Solutions was failing, not declining failing. We had maybe 6 months of operating capital left when I came on board. 6 months before bankruptcy, layoffs, and closure. Margaret Chen frowned. That's not what the financial reports showed. Because the financial reports were wrong. The previous management team had been cooking the books for over a year, hiding losses, inflating revenue, deferring expenses. The company was a financial disaster disguised as a going concern. Patricia stood up and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. The board hired me to turn things around, but they also made it clear that failure wasn't an option. Save the company or lose everything? Jobs, pensions, investor capital, everything. She turned back to face us. So yes, I created some creative vendor relationships. Yes, I used consulting payments to move money around and stabilize our cash flow. Yes, I eliminated people who might ask inconvenient questions about financial management during a crisis. The room was dead silent, but it worked. We're profitable now. Revenue is up, expenses are down, and we're no longer facing bankruptcy. The company is saved. By embezzling $300,000, Rebecca said. By doing whatever was necessary to keep this company alive and preserve the jobs of 43 people. Patricia's voice was getting louder, more defensive. By making hard choices that nobody else was willing to make. Janet Williams leaned forward. Patricia, are you admitting to financial fraud? I'm admitting to saving this company when nobody else could or would. Margaret Chen was shaking her head. Patricia, even if your intentions were to help the company, what you're describing is still fraud. You can't embezzle money and forge documents, even with good intentions. Watch me. The air conditioning cycled on, filling the silence with that familiar electrical hum. Patricia walked back to her chair and started gathering up her presentation materials. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to submit my resignation effective immediately. In exchange, you're going to provide me with a standard separation package and a neutral reference letter. No criminal charges, no public disclosure, no damage to my professional reputation. And if we don't agree to those terms, David Morrison asked. Patricia smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, the smile looked genuine. Then I released the real financial records, the ones that show how close this company came to bankruptcy, the ones that show how the previous management team had been systematically defrauding investors for over a year. She pulled a flash drive out of her laptop bag. The ones that show how the board of directors was either complicit in the fraud or so incompetent they didn't notice their company was being systematically looted. Margaret Chen's face went very pale. You're blackmailing us. I'm proposing a mutually beneficial arrangement. I walk away quietly, you avoid a scandal that would destroy the company and ruin your professional reputations. Everyone wins. Janet Williams stood up. Ms. Henley, I'm a former federal prosecutor. I don't respond well to blackmail. And I'm a former forensic accountant. I don't respond well to being made a scapegoat for problems I didn't create. The two women stared at each other across the conference table, and I realized we were witnessing a standoff between two people who were used to winning. There's a third option, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. We tell the truth, all of it. Patricia's embezzlement, the previous management team's fraud, the board's oversight failures, everything. That would destroy the company, David Morrison said. Maybe, or maybe it would save it. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the conference room. Patricia's right about one thing: this company was in serious financial trouble. But instead of addressing the problems honestly, everyone involved chose to cover them up, manipulate them, or profit from them. I picked up a dry erase marker and started writing. Option 1. We let Patricia walk away quietly, and in 6 months or a year, the next financial crisis brings down the whole company anyway. Option 2. We prosecute Patricia, but ignore the underlying problems, and the company fails because we never actually fixed what was broken. Option 3. We acknowledge that everyone made mistakes, we implement real oversight and accountability measures, and we rebuild the company on an honest foundation. I turned back to face the room. Rebecca's mother needs chemotherapy treatments that cost $1,500 a month. Danny's daughter needs special education services that depend on his employment benefits. 43 people work here because they need jobs, not because they want to be part of a financial shell game. I looked at Patricia. You said you did all this to save the company. Prove it. Help us build something honest instead of something that just looks successful from the outside. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, staring at the whiteboard. You're asking me to incriminate myself. I'm asking you to help fix what you helped break. And in exchange, I looked at the board members. Full disclosure, complete financial audit, implementation of real oversight procedures, and immunity from prosecution in exchange for cooperation and restitution. Janet Williams shook her head. I can't promise immunity. That's not my decision to make. But you can recommend it, Margaret Chen said. And you can help us structure a resolution that focuses on fixing the company rather than assigning blame. Patricia walked back to the window and stared out at the parking lot for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet and tired. The consulting reports were fake. The subsidiary companies were shells. I embezzled approximately $400,000 over 8 months. She turned back to face us. But the financial crisis was real. The previous management fraud was real. And if we don't address those problems, this company will fail anyway. Rebecca leaned forward. What kind of fraud are we talking about? Patricia pulled out her laptop and opened a different file. Revenue, inflation, expense deferral, vendor kickbacks, unauthorized loan guarantees. The previous COO and CFO had been systematically looting the company for over 2 years. She turned the laptop so we could see the screen. I discovered it during my first week on the job. The company wasn't just in financial trouble, it was technically insolvent. The only reason we hadn't collapsed was because no one had figured out how bad things really were. David Morrison was reading over Patricia's shoulder. These numbers, how is this possible? Because nobody was paying attention, Patricia said simply. The board was focused on growth metrics and stock price. The management team was focused on bonuses and promotions. Nobody was actually looking at the fundamental financial health of the company. Margaret Chen sat down heavily. So when you say you saved the company, I bought us time. The embezzlement was wrong, but it kept us solvent long enough to implement real operational improvements. We're profitable now because we actually fixed the underlying business problems. Janet Williams was taking notes. Patricia, are you willing to cooperate with a full forensic audit, including testimony about the previous management team's activities? Yes. Are you willing to make full restitution for the funds you embezzled? Yes. Are you willing to work with law enforcement to recover funds stolen by the previous management team? Patricia hesitated. That depends on what kind of protection I'm offered. We'll work something out, Janet said. The goal here is to recover stolen assets and prevent future fraud, not to destroy lives. I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying for months without realizing it. So what happens now? Margaret Chen looked around the room. Now we do this right. Full forensic audit, complete financial disclosure to investors and employees, implementation of real oversight procedures, and we rebuild this company on a foundation of transparency and accountability. She looked at me. Marcus, I think we're going to need someone with strong operational analysis skills to help manage this transition. Are you interested in staying on, perhaps in an expanded role? Shonanimwam. I thought about my severance package sitting unsigned on my desk downstairs. About the 8 years I'd spent learning every procedure, every policy, every clause in the employee handbook. About the fact that following the rules perfectly hadn't protected anyone, but standing up for what was right had. I'm interested. Good, Rebecca. We're going to need someone with strong financial analysis skills to help with the audit and implement new accounting procedures. Interested, Wayne Wei. Rebecca smiled for the first time since this whole thing started. Very interested. Danny, we're going to need someone who understands building systems and security procedures to help implement better oversight and access controls. Sound like something you'd want to be involved in? Danny grinned. Sounds like job security. Margaret Chen stood up. All right then, we have a lot of work to do. As we filed out of the conference room, Patricia caught my arm. Marcus, I want you to know I never intended for any of this to hurt people like Rebecca or Danny. I was trying to save the company. I know, I said, but good intentions don't justify bad actions. No, they don't. She paused. For what it's worth, you were right to stand up to me. If more people had been willing to ask hard questions earlier, maybe none of this would have happened. I thought about that as I walked back to my desk to retrieve my still unsigned severance package. The air conditioning was still humming its familiar tune, but somehow it sounded different now. Less like the background noise of corporate routine, and more like the sound of a building that was still alive, still breathing, still functioning. Still home to 43 people who needed it to be. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same conference room where this whole thing had started, but in a very different capacity. As Meridian Solutions' new Director of Operations and Compliance, I was presenting our quarterly oversight report to the board. The company was profitable, legitimately profitable, with transparent accounting and real client relationships. We'd recovered most of the embezzled funds through asset forfeiture and insurance claims. The previous management team had been prosecuted and sentenced with restitution orders that would keep paying back stolen money for years to come. Patricia had received probation and community service in exchange for her cooperation, and she was working as a forensic accounting consultant, helping other companies identify and prevent fraud. Poetic justice, Rebecca called it. Rebecca's mother was in remission, her treatments fully covered by our enhanced healthcare plan. Danny's daughter was thriving in a new special education program that our improved benefits package made possible, and both of them had been promoted to senior positions in the new organizational structure. As for me, I'd learned that sometimes following the rules isn't enough. Sometimes you have to be willing to break the comfortable silence and ask the hard questions, even when it's easier to look the other way. The air conditioning was still too cold, but I'd stopped noticing it most days. Some things, it turns out, you can learn to live with. Others, you have to be willing to change.